All right, welcome back to Photoshop for photographers, and today we're going to take a look at color adjustments. Now, the two main color adjustments we're going to take a look at are up here. The first one is color balance. So color balance, we can adjust the color. Then we have hue saturation. And then we have one down here called selective color. The first adjustment we're going to take a look is color balance, which is right here. So we're going to go ahead, click color balance. You will notice by default, it is set up to adjust the color in the midtones. This does not mean it doesn't affect the shadows or the highlights. It's just affecting the midtones a little bit more. You can isolate that so it affects the highlights or the shadows as well, but we're just going to stick with midtones here. And it's very simple. Over here you have red. So if you slide this to the right, you're going to get more red. If you slide this to the left, you're going to get more cyan. Down here, same thing. Green this way, magenta this way, blue this way, yellow this way. I'm going to come down here and click this little kind of reset button, and that's going to allow me to reset what I just did. Now, color balance is good for minor color shifts. Now let's go over this again. Minor color shifts. The problem is in an image like this, where sometimes you have a lot of just oversaturated color, it's just going to make that color either more red or more yellow, and it's still going to always be oversaturated. It is not something that I use a lot. You would think that color balance would be the main way to color correct an image. And in fact, I find that not to be true, because a lot of times it's just the color in the image is not accurate. So in this case, what we need to do is actually use hue saturation instead of color balance. But we're going to go ahead and try to fix this. Now, the one thing to remember is magenta. Magenta is a nasty color. If you get a facial tone or something that should not be magenta in your image, it is really difficult to adjust it. When you're working in RAW, you should do everything possible to make sure that your image is not magenta in a flesh tone or an area where you don't want magenta. Because the problem arises when you go into hue saturation, like we'll see here in a second, you can kind of suck that color out or shift that color, but you can't do it that well with magenta. So we're going to come in here and we'll see, okay, this looks a little bit red. We're going to shift this and that looks better. And then I think we can add a little more green to get some of that magenta there. And then we have some yellows and blues. And I don't think there's too much we can do. We'll just leave that. So we made some minor adjustments, and I'll come down here to the eye and kind of turn that off and turn that on so we can see what we did. And this is neutralized and really fixed this background here. But notice we still have kind of like some very reddish colors inside of this image. If you make this more blue to fix that, all you're doing is making the whole thing more cyan. So that brings us to hue saturation. Hue saturation is actually my favorite color balancing tool. I use this most of the time to do all the color correction in my images, especially with portraits, because the fact is that a lot of times the color in the image is not an accurate color of how it should have been. Now here's how we work hue saturation. Notice we have a master, and most of the time you're not using master. I'll just take my saturation and drag it all the way down, and it's going to turn it to black and white. I can take my saturation and boost it way up, and it's going to be this super saturated color. This controls the saturation of the image. Hue changes the color of the colors. So this, I'm changing all the colors inside the image. And you might be able to get some cool effects like this, but usually you don't want to change the color of all the colors in the image. Lightness either makes things brighter or darker in your image. What you want to do most of the time is you identify the problem color in your image. In this case, it's red. So I'm going to drop down to the red color in this image. Now, when I make an adjustment, I'm just affecting the reds in this image. So what I can do in this case where there's too much red, I know that if I go to the right here, it's actually going to start to turn this yellow. It's going to change the color of the color and make that red more yellowish green. We're just going to go ahead and do that. Now remember, when we started this, I said that one of the issues is that the colors are actually oversaturated. And this had to do with two issues. One, this was an underexposed image, and probably the type of lighting used in this image. The way you can fix that is to desaturate your color. So a lot of times this, no matter what I would do in color balance, it would never fix this. What I need to do is desaturate this color. Now, how much you desaturate it is really going to depend on you. Some people like vibrant images, some people like neutral images, some people like warm images, some people like cool images. But the fact remains we have too much red. So what we're going to do is reduce the amount of red in the image to help neutralize that skin tone. So you can see just by reducing that red, we have made this a whole lot better. So let's go ahead and turn this on and off. This is before, and as all we did was change red. I made the red a little yellow green, and I desaturated it a little bit. And we're a much more pleasing skin tone than we had originally. I'm going to go back into that red channel. Now I can come in here and actually increase the brightness of that red channel as well, which I think in this case is actually going to help. We were there and now we're here. A huge difference in the color of this image. Now, what happens if we wanted to adjust yellow? I can come in here, I can change the color of the yellow, but that's not going to really help this image. I can increase, or decrease the color. And one important thing you can do is if you don't know if this image has yellow, if you just take this slider and go all the way to the right, it's going to like super saturate the yellow areas. So you can tell if it has yellow in the image. And yes, it has yellow. So if I want to get rid of some of that yellow, I can do this little thing here. I'm going to take this and go this way. This is going to make this more red. I want to go negative. I'm only going to go a few. So we'll go maybe 2 or 3. So basically I'm taking the yellow and making that more red. Before we made the red more yellow and we're making the yellow more red. And what that does is put those values closer to each other and more accurately. We've reduced some saturation than if I wanted to increase the brightness. And in this image, I don't really want to. So let's turn that on and off so we can see that's where we were before and that's where we are now. And that's just with red and yellow color adjustments. Now let's come down here to green. Let's see if we have any green. So I'm going to take this hue saturation and go all the way to the right. It looks like there's a little bit in the eye actually, but there's basically no green, so we don't have to worry about adjusting that. Let's come down here and turn these off. So this was our color balance adjustment. And all we did with this is just get it a little bit closer. Truthfully, I don't use color balance a lot because I can come up here and I can do those color adjustments inside of curves. So remember, I can go into the red channel, and if I slide down, it's making it more blue, and I slide up, it's making it more red. So instead of making a color balance adjustment in color balance, I can do it in curves just like I did color balance. It's basically doing the same thing. We're going to go ahead and turn these off. We'll leave the color balance on. And we're going to come up here to the last one, which is selective color. Now, selective color is very similar in the way it works compared to hue saturation. In fact, that we have the red, yellow, greens, blues, magentas, whites, blacks, neutrals. We have the ability to adjust the color of each color inside of selective color. Now, a lot of people really like selective color over hue saturation. So what we'll do is, remember, we didn't like the red in the image. So we have selected red here, and then I can come into the cyans and I can adjust the color of that color. And I can come in if there's any magentas in there, I can adjust the magenta and then the yellow. And remember, this is just red. And then we can come down here and I can adjust the black value so I can make it darker or lighter. The problem with this one a lot of times is it doesn't allow you to adjust the saturation. And so though I can kind of get the color more accurate like I did in hue saturation, selective color doesn't allow you to desaturate a color. So if I need to desaturate a color, you will normally see me not use selective color. But it does give you a little bit more control over adjusting specific colors more accurately. We can come down here and we'll take a look at magenta. So I can get into the magenta and I can really adjust it. Now the problem is there's not a lot of magenta in this image. So if I come up here to yellow, where there's a lot of yellow in the image, it's going to allow me to really kind of change or adjust that color a whole lot more. That is selective color. Now, these are items that I can show you how they work, but you need to actually practice with them to get used to them. Personally, I rarely use selective color just because I use hue saturation so much. I prefer hue saturation over selective color. But that doesn't mean that sometimes selective color is not a better choice. And in that instance, when I can't get something right with hue saturation, you might see me make a selective color adjustment so I can further adjust that adjustment there instead of hue saturation. Color balance, I don't find very useful. And because I do most of my color adjustment in curves, you will not see me do much adjustment in color balance. However, sometimes I'll make some small little tweaks to something inside of color balance just because it's easy and quick. So let's go ahead and we'll run through this again. We're going to go up here to File and I'm going to hit Revert. And this is going to take this image back to the beginning. The first thing that we did was go into color balance and we're just going to adjust that color balance a little bit. Now, if I want to get into the shadow areas and affect some shadow areas more, I can come in here and easily affect those shadow areas. And I can simply dial stuff how I want it to be. And you could do the same thing with the highlights. So I've got this pretty close to where I am. But once again, this image is a little bit dark and a little bit oversaturated. So we're going to go over here to hue saturation and drop down to red. Red is the color that I see that is the problem. Going to the right is going to make it that more reddish green. We just want to dial a little bit of that in. And usually if you're making a big adjustment, something's wrong. You should only be doing, less than 10 units most likely, except for saturation. Sometimes saturation, you're going to go a little bit more than that. We're adjusting the color of the color. And then I can come in here to yellow. And this way is making things a little bit more red. I can desaturate a little bit. And if I want to brighten that color, I can. And then I can come in here and make a small adjustment just to brighten this whole image up. And what we'll do here is group all this stuff. So I'm going to shift click, hit Command G, and we'll turn it on and off. This is where we have it now, and that's where we were. Is it perfect? No, we just did a quick tone. I could have got this a whole lot more accurate if I wanted. But that is how I color correct inside of Adobe Photoshop using the unusual tool of hue saturation. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.